You can't even pay for your daughter's winter coat. What kind of father does that make you?" Serena said it at the kitchen table, her voice not raised, which was worse than shouting. She set the papers down the way you set down something you've been carrying for a long time and are finally glad to put away. The envelope slid across the laminate surface and stopped at the edge of Patrick's coffee mug. Across the hall, behind a door with a hand-painted wooden sign that read Zoe's room, their 7-year-old daughter lay on her stomach doing homework, her coat hanging on the back of her chair because the zipper had broken 2 weeks ago and Patrick had not yet replaced it. He had sewn the lining. He had rigged a safety pin at the collar that held against the wind. He had told Zoe it was an adventure coat and that all the best explorers had coats that looked a little roughed up, and she had believed him with the complete and unquestioning faith that small children give to the one person they trust absolutely. Serena had not believed him in a long time. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," she said. She was in her work clothes, the blazer she wore when she had morning meetings with the development team, her hair pinned back with the precision that told Patrick she had not come home to negotiate. "I had him look at the paperwork last month." Last month. Patrick had been driving home from a job site last month, listening to Zoe on the phone in the back seat recite the names of all the provinces in alphabetical order because her class was competing for a prize. He had been laughing. He had been so far from imagining this that the distance felt almost comic now. He did not reach for the envelope. He looked at it the way a man looks at a thing he has been expecting, without knowing he was expecting it. "His name is Brandon," Serena said. "He's a partner at Ashwood Capital. He's been advising our firm on the restructuring and we—" She stopped, lifted her chin. "I'm not going to explain myself. You already know things haven't been right for years." Patrick's eyes moved, just once, toward the window that looked out over the driveway. His pickup was parked at the curb because the driveway needed to be repaved, and he hadn't had the money to do it, and he'd patched the worst of the cracking himself with cold patch asphalt on a Saturday morning. With Zoe handing him tools she was too small to understand, calling herself the assistant foreman. He looked away from the window before Serena could see him look. "All right," he said. She blinked. "That's it, all right?" He didn't answer. There was nothing to answer. He had learned over the years that some conversations have already ended before they begin, and the words that follow are just the echo of a door already closed. She lingered at the table longer than she needed to. There was something in her face he recognized, not guilt exactly, but the frustration of a woman who had prepared for a fight and found only stillness on the other side. His calm had always read to her as distance. She had never understood that a man can be both fully present and completely unreachable at the same time. "I'll get a bag tonight," she said. "I'll come for the rest of the things on the weekend. Zoe can." "We'll work out, Zoe. We'll work out, Zoe," Patrick repeated, and the flatness of it made her hesitate at the door, though she did not turn back. He heard her knock on Zoe's door. He heard his daughter's voice brighten the way it did when she didn't know she was supposed to be sad. He heard the words "staying at a friend's" and "see you soon" bug in the particular silence that follows a door closing when someone is trying not to make noise. Then the front door. Then the sound of an Uber pulling away from the curb. Zoe appeared in the kitchen doorway in her socks, holding her broken zippered coat and looking at him with the expression of a child trying to read weather. "Is Mom coming back tonight?" "Not tonight," Patrick said. "You want to help me figure out dinner?" She considered this with great seriousness. "Do we have eggs?" "We always have eggs." "Okay," she said, and padded across the linoleum to stand beside him at the counter, and that was that. Patrick Dowd had grown up in Sudbury, the second son of a mining engineer who died at 53 with calluses on his hands and a clean conscience, and he had inherited both things. He worked construction management, which meant he spent his days on job sites in a hard hat, knowing exactly where every dollar went and why, and he spent his evenings in a small house in Barhaven, fixing the things that needed fixing and reading to Zoe, until she fell asleep with her face turned toward the lamp. He was 41 years old, and he had a patience that people sometimes mistook for passivity, and a mind that ran, always, beneath the surface of whatever face he showed the world. The house was modest. The truck was 12 years old. The coat had a broken zipper, and Serena had not been wrong that the money was tight, only wrong about why. She had been wrong about almost everything except that things were not right, and that part he could not argue. What she did not know, what no one in Patrick Dowd's visible life had ever known, was the folder on the server at the firm of Strand Wickham LLP in downtown Ottawa, a firm that existed behind the kind of letterhead that makes bank managers straighten their ties. What she did not know was the shell company, and the holding company above that, and the trust above that, and the man listed as sole beneficiary of the trust, Patrick James Dowd of Barhaven, Ontario. What she did not know was that 11 years ago, before Zoe, before the house, before the pickup with the cracked windshield, Patrick had built a logistics technology company from a server room rented by the hour in a Canada strip mall. He had sold it. Quietly, completely. To a firm whose name appeared regularly in the report on business. The number involved had required a separate paragraph of his lawyer's explanation just to read it properly. He had walked out of the closing with enough money to buy the street he'd grown up on, and kept working construction. Because the work was honest and he knew what he was doing. And because the alternative was becoming the kind of man he had watched ruin everything that mattered to him. There had been a woman before Serena. Her name had been Joanna, and she had loved Patrick when he was sharp and driven, and in rooms she never fully understood. And the men in those rooms had eventually understood that reaching Patrick directly was difficult, and reaching the people he loved was not. There had been pressure. There had been a period of 2 years that Patrick did not speak about, and at the end of it Joanna had been gone, and Patrick had sat in a chair in a hospital hallway understanding, with absolute and devastating clarity, what the life he had built had cost. He had made a choice in that hallway. He had chosen ordinary, not because he was broken, because he understood, in a way that only grief can teach, that the things worth protecting cannot be protected from inside a glass tower. You protect them by becoming invisible. You protect them by living on a street where nobody thinks to look. He had met Serena 2 years later. He had hoped she had wanted the man in the Carhartt jacket and the 12-year-old truck. He had been wrong, and the wrongness had taken 7 years to become undeniable. But it had always been there the way a hairline crack is always there before the wall gives. He signed the papers on a Tuesday morning before Zoe woke up. He used the same pen he signed site inspection reports with. He did not read the document. There was nothing in it he needed to see. The weeks that followed had the particular texture of a life being rearranged by someone else's hands. Brandon Holt was exactly the kind of man Patrick had spent 11 years learning to avoid noticing in himself. He wore his ambition the way certain men wear watches, not to tell time but to be seen telling it. He had done well in commercial real estate, and then done better by moving capital rather than property. And he had developed the habit of treating other men's value as a number he could look up and act upon. He had been looking Patrick up. It started small, a word to Patrick's employer, something vague about concerns over performance. Delivered through the right channel to produce the right effect. A problem with the permit on a residential build Patrick was managing. A problem that should have taken 2 weeks to resolve and took 6, and in the gap Patrick lost the contract. Then a second permit issue on a different job. Then a phone call Patrick received from a subcontractor he'd worked with for 4 years, apologetic, distant, explaining that he'd been told things. Patrick sat with each of these the way he sat with a structural problem on a site, quietly, thoroughly, without the luxury of panic. He made no calls he didn't need to make. He did not confront. He counted what he had in the joint account, which was enough for now, and he arranged what he needed to arrange. What Brandon Holt did not know, could not have known, because the structure had been designed specifically so that people like Brandon Holt would not know it, was that the development firm he had joined 8 months ago, as a partner, had been financed in its founding round through a chain of intermediaries that ended eventually at a holding company in Ottawa. The chain was long. The fog was thick. Brandon had been too confident and too busy to trace it. The capital that had made him a partner, the number that had moved his name from advisor to principal, had come from a trust he had never examined. It had come from Patrick. Zoe knew something was different. She was 7, and she knew the way children know things. Through the skin, through the change in a room's temperature, through the things adults don't say louder than the things they do. She had stopped asking when Mommy was coming home. She asked instead whether they could get pancakes on Saturday, and whether her dad could come to the reading circle at school, and whether they could get a library card for the new branch by the Loblaws. Patrick got her the library card on a Thursday after pickup. They walked there in the October cold. Zoe's coat still held shut by the safety pin at the collar, and she selected 4 books with the gravity of a person making decisions of great consequence. On the walk home, she tucked her hand into his and told him the one about the lighthouse keeper looked like it might be her favorite, even though she hadn't read it yet. He had the money to replace the coat. He could have replaced it the day the zipper broke. He had not replaced it because replacing it meant explaining where the money came from, and that conversation led to a room he was not yet ready to unlock. He had told himself he'd find a moment. The moment kept moving. A boy in Zoe's class called her the safety pin kid. She came home not crying, which was worse than crying, and went to her room and came out for dinner and ate everything on her plate and did not mention it. "How was school?" Patrick said. "Fine," Zoe said, and then quietly to her plate. "Some kids say mean things." "What kind of mean things?" She shrugged. "About our house, about you." She looked up. "Tyler said Mom left because you're, like, she worked with it, that you're going nowhere." Something moved across Patrick's face and was gone. He reached over and folded both hands gently over hers on the table. "Can I tell you something?" he said. She nodded. "There are people who decide what a man is worth by what's in his bank account, and there are people who decide what a man is worth by what he would give up everything to protect." He looked at her steadily. "You'll meet both kinds your whole life. Try to be the second kind." Zoe considered this. "Which kind is Tyler?" "I think Tyler's still figuring it out." She thought about that. "Okay," she said, and ate the rest of her dinner. On a Thursday night in November, Patrick's phone rang at 12 minutes past 9. Ottawa area code, but a direct line he'd kept active for years and almost never heard ring. He looked at it on the kitchen table for 2 full rings before he picked it up. The voice on the other end was his lawyer, Malcolm, who was not a man who called at 9 o'clock for ordinary reasons. He spoke for a little over a minute. His voice had the controlled urgency of a man delivering news he'd been sitting on for hours. The firm of Strand Wickham had been approached by the Canada Revenue Agency for evaluation in connection with a broader review of a series of trust instruments and holding structures, specifically those connected to the sale of a logistics technology company 11 years prior. The review had not been adversarial. It had in fact resulted in a clean confirmation of the original structure. But the confirmation had required, for the first time, the filing of documentation that attached a legal name to the trust. The name was public, effective the following morning. Patrick said nothing for a long moment. Through the wall he could hear Zoe's breathing in the slow register of sleep. "You understand what this means," Malcolm said. "The number will be in the public record. The connection to the sale will be in the public record. It was always a question of when, not whether. You've known that." "I know," Patrick said. "There will be reporters. There will be people calling this office. I strongly recommend." "I'll call you in the morning," Patrick said. He set the phone down. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time in the quiet that Zoe's sleeping made, which was the best quiet he knew. Then he went and stood in her doorway and watched the slow rise and fall of the blanket over her small shape. "All right," he said to the dark, to the city outside that had no idea, to himself. "All right." The story broke the way these things break, not with one wave but with a series of them, each one larger. The first was the filing itself, picked up by a business journalist at the Globe, who had been tracking the trust structure for months without knowing where it ended. The second was the sale, which had been 11 years old, but whose details, once attached to a name, produced the kind of arithmetic that morning programs like to put on a chyron. The third was the logistics company itself, which had transformed the sector in ways people remembered without knowing who to credit. By noon, Patrick Dowd of Barhaven was the subject of the longest Wikipedia stub-to-article conversion in living memory. He drove Zoe to school himself. He had not changed how he drove, or where, or in what. The reporters found the house by the afternoon, but there were only 3 of them, and they left by dinner, when it became clear he was not going to come out. He made pasta. He helped with the homework on the Treaty of Paris. He told Zoe she could stay up an extra 30 minutes if she read in bed, which she always agreed to because she would have read anyway. He called Malcolm again after she was asleep. How many requests? 47 as of an hour ago. I expect it to be over 100 by morning. Tell them I'm not available, Patrick, tell them I'm busy. He was busy. He had a child to get to school in the morning. The geography of Serena's life had rearranged itself around Brandon by then, in the way that lives rearrange around a new center of gravity. There were events. There were photographs on accounts Patrick had stopped looking at. There was a column in a city lifestyle publication that described Brandon as one of Ottawa's most dynamic capital architects, with Serena mentioned by name in the final paragraph as a key executive at a firm that was itself benefiting from his vision. She read the story about Patrick the way she read financial news, with the partial attention of someone it doesn't quite apply to. Then she read it again. Then she sat with her coffee cooling in front of her and did the thing she had been doing since the morning after the Sterling fundraiser, which was put facts together in an order that kept producing a result she refused to accept: the logistics company. She had known about it, vaguely. Early in their relationship, Patrick had mentioned it as a thing that hadn't worked out, a startup that hadn't gone anywhere, said with the same flat affect he used to describe weather. She had believed him because it fit the shape of the man she had already decided he was. The safe in the garage. He had kept a heavy-duty safe bolted to the floor behind the chest freezer, and told her it contained legal documents, and she had not asked again because it seemed consistent with a man who was meticulous in irritating ways. She understood now what meticulous meant. The men. There had been men over the years, 3 or 4 of them across 7 years of marriage, who had appeared at the front door asking for Patrick and been sent away before she could get a good look. Expensive men in subtle coats, the kind of men who don't stand on strangers' front steps unless they are there on purpose. She had been married to the man in the newspaper. She had packed a bag and moved into Brandon's condominium downtown and driven past Patrick's pickup at the curb and thought, nowhere. She sat with that for a long time. The evening it cracked open publicly was the Rogers Centre Gala in Toronto, a black-tie event for the technology sector that drew the people who funded the things other people built. Brandon had managed to secure a table through a contact at Mars, and he arrived with Serena in a gown she'd bought for the occasion, and for an hour they were exactly what they had spent months becoming. A couple ascending, photographed, introduced to names she'd only read in publications. She had not expected to feel as good as she did. She'd spent a long time not feeling good, and the relief of feeling good was its own kind of intoxication, and she was standing in it when the room changed. It changed the way weather changes in southern Ontario, fast and total. A current moved through the crowd from the entrance inward. Conversations shortened. Heads turned. The particular hush that falls when a room recognizes something it was not prepared for. A man had come in through the main doors in a dark jacket that was good without being loud. He moved without hurry. He had the posture of someone who had long ago stopped needing rooms to arrange themselves around him, and they arranged themselves around him anyway. The president of a major bank crossed the floor to meet him and shook his hand with both of his own. Serena knew the walk before she let herself know the face. She knew the set of the shoulders and the way he held his stillness through a crowd, the way a post holds still in moving water. Her glass stopped somewhere on its way to her mouth. It was Patrick. She had last seen him at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, unshaved, signing papers with a site inspector's pen, and now the room that had been politely ignoring her for an hour was folding itself toward him. He was at the podium. The host was speaking. Serena could not hear the introduction over the sound of her own understanding arriving too fast. "There's been a lot of speculation," Patrick said, and his voice filled the room without effort. The voice of a man who had simply never needed to shout, about who built what and why and where the money came from and where it went. "I'm told tonight is a reasonable time to clarify." He did not smile. "My name is Patrick Dowd. I built Harbor Logic in 2013 and sold it in 2014. I've been running the capital from that transaction through a trust called Dowd Holdings ever since. I understand several of the people in this room have done business with that trust without knowing whose name was on it." He paused. "Now you know." The room did not applaud. It did something more interesting. It went completely quiet, the silence of several hundred people revising their understanding of the past. Across the room, Brandon Holt had gone the color of old snow. He was running the calculation. He had run it halfway through the third sentence, and he did not like where it ended. His partnership, the capital that had elevated him from advisor to principal, had come through a chain of intermediaries he had been too self-satisfied to fully trace. He had built his name on the quiet money of the man whose wife he had taken. He understood this the way you understand something that cannot be ununderstood. Brandon moved toward the exit. Serena watched him go. She did not follow. She found Patrick near a window at the far end of the room, briefly alone, the lights of Toronto spread out below like a circuit board. "You let me believe," she said. Her voice was not steady. "For 7 years. You let me think we couldn't afford, that we were always just short. You let me feel like I was waiting for a man who was never going to arrive." Patrick looked at her for a long time. When he spoke, there was no cruelty in it, which was the part she'd been bracing for and not receiving. "You asked me to be someone who chased the visible things, who made himself large so everyone could see how large he was." He looked out the window. "I'd already been that man. I knew what it took out of you. Not out of me. Out of the people around you. What does that mean?" He was quiet for a moment. When he looked back at her, there was something in his face she had never seen before, not because it was new, but because she had not known how to read it. "Her name was Joanna," he said. "She was Zoe's mother. She died when Zoe was 4 months old, and the men I'd been doing business with sent flowers to the funeral and kept calling the week after because the deal was still open." Serena said nothing. "I walked away from all of it the day we buried her. I took the baby and I moved to a street where nobody knew me, and I chose deliberately to live as a man nobody needed to investigate." He paused. "I married you as that man. I hoped you'd wanted him." He stepped back, not away exactly, just into his own space. "Drive safe going back," he said. "It's supposed to be icy on the 401 tonight." And he turned back into the room and the crowd absorbed him, and Serena stood at the window for a long time, looking at the city that had rearranged itself around a man she had packed a bag and left. The architecture of Brandon Holt's professional life began to fail the week after the gala. It did not happen dramatically. The capital that had financed his partnership came under review as part of the same trust documentation that had made the news. Intermediaries who had been accommodating became formal. A line of credit did not renew. A bank that had been returning calls stopped returning calls. He made the rounds and found that the temperature of every room had dropped. He understood eventually that he was not being destroyed. He was being released. The hand that had been quietly beneath him for 8 months had simply opened, and there was nothing he had built that was strong enough to fall from that height and land. He confronted Patrick once, in the lobby of a building Patrick had no reason to be in except that he was. Brandon had talked his way past 2 levels of staff to get there, which told Patrick most of what he needed to know about the man. "You're doing this over a woman," Brandon said. "You're burning down everything I built over a woman who came to me." Patrick regarded him without hostility, which was worse than hostility. "I'm not burning anything, Mr. Holt. I'm withdrawing capital. It was always my capital to withdraw." He glanced at the folder in Brandon's hand. "You slashed the tires on a pickup truck. You made a call to a permit office about a man you'd decided was beneath you. You did those things because you were certain he couldn't answer." His eyes were level. "I'm answering, that's the whole of it." Brandon's fund was placed under creditor protection 6 weeks later. The columns that had called him dynamic called him overextended, then distressed, then settled into the past tense that means the same thing without using the word. Serena came to the house on a Saturday in December. Patrick's truck was in the driveway now, the cracks filled and sealed properly, the driveway repaved. She stood at the door in her plain coat, and when he answered, she looked like a woman who had been a long way and come back smaller than she'd left. "I made a mistake," she said. "I know I don't have a right to ask for anything, but Zoe, she needs her mother, and I need." She stopped, started again. "We could try, for her." In the living room, Zoe had gone very still. Patrick said nothing for a moment. He looked at the woman in his doorway with the clear, settled attention of a man who is not angry and is not forgiving and is simply seeing things as they are. "You didn't leave me because things were hard," he said. "People leave when things are hard. I understand that. I don't hold it." His voice was even. "You left because you'd already decided what I was worth. You looked at the man who sewed his daughter's coat lining and put a safety pin where the zipper used to be, and you saw nothing that deserved staying for, and nothing that's come out since. No number, no filing. None of it changes what you saw when you looked at me then." She was crying. "That's not fair." "No," he said. "It isn't." He opened the door a little wider. "Zoe's inside. You can come in and see her." She did. She sat with Zoe on the couch for 40 minutes while Patrick made tea in the kitchen and didn't listen, or tried not to. He heard his daughter's voice, careful and polite in the way that children are polite when they're protecting something. He heard Serena laugh once, a small sound, surprised out of her. When Serena left, she looked back at the window. Zoe was there. She lifted a hand. Zoe lifted hers. It was a beginning of something. Patrick was not certain what. He was not certain the uncertainty was bad. The story the media told about Patrick Dowd was irresistible and therefore briefly everywhere. The construction manager who had sold a company for a number, with 9 figures and gone back to site work. The man who drove a 12-year-old pickup and lived on a street in Barhaven and sewed his daughter's coat with a needle and thread. The contrast between the photograph taken at the Toronto Gala and the one a journalist found from a job site 2 years prior. Patrick in a hard hat against a gray sky, squinting at a clipboard. The papers ran them side and let the gap do the talking. Patrick hated it. He endured it. He stopped reading alerts and let Malcolm handle the requests and kept driving Zoe to school himself through a brief gauntlet of cameras that thinned by the second week and was gone by the third. What he did not do was perform regret or gratitude or vindication for anyone's benefit. He had not spent 11 years building an invisible life, so he could spend the next 11 explaining it. He bought the street, not as a gesture, not to make a point, because the families who lived there had leases coming due and a development proposal had been filed for the block. The kind of proposal that replaces modest houses with glass and steel, something that benefits everyone, except the people who already live there. He bought the whole block and quietly withdrew the proposal, and the rents stayed what they were. His neighbor, a retired teacher named Agnes, who had once brought over a casserole when Zoe had chickenpox, did not know for 3 months that her landlord had changed. When she found out, she brought another casserole. He started a scholarship in Joanna's name, not for students who had excelled, for students whose parents worked the jobs that kept a city running. Drivers, site workers, service workers, the people whose children learned early that the world has a preferred customer. The first cohort was 15 students. He did not attend the ceremony. He sent Malcolm. On a Saturday in March, Patrick stood at the edge of the outdoor rink at the community center, watching Zoe navigate a figure 8 in the careful, determined way she approached everything. She had grown 2 inches since September. The coat she was wearing was new. Properly new, with a real zipper and a hood that actually stayed up. She had kept the old one. He had offered to donate it, and she had said, with the finality of a person who has considered and decided, that she wanted to keep it. He had not asked why. He thought he understood. A man in a senator's toque drifted over to stand beside him at the boards, watching his own kids on the far side of the ice. He glanced sideways at Patrick with the particular expression of someone who thinks they recognize a face and isn't sure they're allowed to say so. "Sorry," the man said. You're the guy, right? The Harbor Logic guy. My brother-in-law works in tech. He talks about you all the time." He laughed a little, uncertain. "What are you doing standing at a community rink on a Saturday?" "Out on the ice." Zoe completed her figure 8 and looked up, searching the boards for her father's face. She found it. She pointed at the ice with great authority, indicating she was going to try a hockey stop. She had been practicing the hockey stop for 2 weeks. Patrick raised a hand to her. Then he turned to the man beside him, and a quiet expression crossed his face that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. "Same as you," Patrick said. "Watching my kid." The man started to say something more, but Patrick had already turned back to the ice, his whole attention given over to the small figure in the new coat who was winding up for a stop that was going to spray ice in a very satisfying arc, and who would turn around afterward looking for exactly one person, checking, the way children check, that the one who matters is there. Patrick was there. Out on the ice, Zoe called his name and pointed again at the boards and then at herself, the universal signal for, "Watch me, watch what I can do." And he nodded, and he called back that he was watching, that he was right here, that he wasn't going anywhere. The March light came down flat and cold over the rink and the boards and the man who had once been on the front page of the Globe, and who wanted, in the end, only to be exactly where he was. Some men spend their whole lives trying to be seen. The rarest ones spend theirs deciding who's worth seeing them,